Hello, everyone. My name is Carolyn Stern. I am the president and CEO of EI Experience, and we are a leadership development and emotional intelligence training firm. You can all hopefully see my screen and where we're going to go into developing effective leaders through emotional intelligence. I will also talk a little bit about the EQI 2.0 model developed by Multi Health System, who has graciously sponsored this event. And I'll be talking about real case studies of how leaders and I use the EQI to develop their leadership to be really impactful leaders. And so today we've got a lot to cover in a short period of time. So let me get started. Our agenda today is we're going to talk about why emotional intelligence matters now. We're going to move into emotional intelligence and leadership. We're then going to do a business case studies. I actually have 5 case studies that I'd like to show you of how each person's emotional makeup both helped and hurt their leadership. And like I said, we'll go through a bunch of case studies. We're going to talk about the business case of emotional intelligence, why even have emotional intelligence. Now, I know I'm in a room mostly with HR professionals, so I think you already have bought into the fact that EI is not just a nice to have, it's a necessity skill. And so then I thought I'd be remiss not to give you some practical tools to develop your own emotionally intelligent leadership. I'm going to give you some tips on how to implement creating a culture of EI. And so the things that you can do to create more of a culture of emotional intelligence. And then we're going to close. Now, I do have the Q&A and chat feature open on my slide. I have a lot to cover. I certainly will look throughout the session at the Q&A and chat if anyone has any questions. But I would love to dig into all of the content. I do want to just share that I have been studying this for over 25 years and have been working with MHS for the last almost 20 years. And so I have maybe not that long, maybe 15. But I've been with them for a really long time. And to me, there are lots of emotional intelligence assessments out there, but my favorite is the EQI, which I will be talking about throughout the session. So why does emotional intelligence matter now? I mean, I think in today's workforce, leaders are being asked to do more with less, right? They're considered they need to learn to navigate constant change. They need to support their teams that are overwhelmed and stretched thin, right? This kind of environment demands not more than just technical skills and and IQ, which is your cognitive intelligence. It requires emotional resilience to stay grounded under pressure, to recover from setbacks, and to lead others through uncertainty. And I think the other thing that I want to stress is leaders need to build a genuine connection with their teams. So when people feel seen, heard, and valued, they're more engaged, loyal, and motivated. And that starts with emotional intelligence. And that means leaders need to be self-aware. How is their emotional makeup helping and hurting them? They need to be empathetic. They need to be attuned to the needs of others. I mean, how many of you have walked into a room and you had no idea what just had happened, but you could feel the tension? What I like to remind people is emotion. Emotions are energy in motion. And so when we walk into a room and feel the tension, I'm not surprised by that. I think the other thing I want to stress is at the heart of every high performing team is trust. And without it, collaboration suffers, communication breaks down, and innovation stalls. And EI skills help leaders model that vulnerability, create psychological safety, and foster trust from the inside out. And I wrote in my book, I'm an author of an award-winning book called The Emotionally Strong Leader. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is when a leader chooses to discuss what they're feeling. No longer are people experiencing only that leader through outward behavior, but rather they're experiencing a deeper connection that from under that's sort of underneath the surface. I think a lot of times we focus so much about, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. I like to think of humans as icebergs. So what you see is what's just immediately apparent. But when this kind of genuine connection happens, when a leader shares more about themselves than just the task completer that they are, others feel seen and heard, cared for and valued, and in a work setting that affects dedication, engagement, and fulfillment. So the question isn't if emotional intelligence matters, it's how do we develop it to meet the real challenges of leadership today. And so I love to share that your job as leaders is not just to manage the change that people are going through, it's to lead your people through the emotions that accompany it. And I think that's a really important thing because with change, change is the event. Whether it's a new boss, a new procedure, a global pandemic, that's the thing that happens. But it's the transitions that people go through, the emotional and psychological process that people go through when dealing with change is what we have to work with our people on. And so, as I said, EI is not just a nice to have skill, it's essential. And so I want to start with emotional intelligence and leadership. And I always like to start with this drawing, which is an iceberg. And if you all connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll put that in the chat, or sorry, I'll put a slide at the end of the session if you're interested in connecting with me, because I'm always posting about emotional intelligence. That is all I talk about 24/7. But if you were to link up with me on LinkedIn, you would see my IQ, you would see my credentials, you would see what got me the job, so to speak. It got my foot in the door. It's my technical skills, right? Cognitive intelligence. But what you wouldn't see is all my EQ, the stuff that goes underneath the surface. And what I'm gonna share. I want you all, as much as I'm gonna share about 5 different case studies, I want you all to think about, how is your emotional makeup helping and hurting you? The reason why I'm so passionate about MHS and this assessment is it ultimately 20 years ago saved my life. It really was the lifeline I needed because I was so down, I was so depressed, and even though I was highly functioning, I couldn't figure out why. And that assessment gave me a roadmap on how to get happier. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the byproduct of emotional intelligence, which is happiness. So again, if you were to all connect with me on LinkedIn, you would see my credentials. But unless you hired me, my EQ wouldn't really come out. And the things that I struggle with as a leader, and I'd be curious if you want to all write in the chat if you also can relate to this, is I have low independence. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean that I can't travel by myself, because up until recently, I was a single, financially independent woman. I just now recently got engaged. But so it's not that I can't do things on my own. It's not that. Independence in this way is about I care too much about what people think. I'm emotionally dependent. Does anyone also struggle with that you care way too much about what people think? Well, that coupled with my over indexed flexibility, which means I over accommodate. Well, that's not a great combination as a leader because my employees take advantage of my generosity. And because I care too much about what they think, I do what they want. And so it's really about figuring out how your makeup helps and hurts you. And the EQI assessment helped me realize what were some of my blind spots. And so what emotional intelligence really is it's the ability to use the information our emotions provide to act appropriately in the face of daily challenges. It's understanding, expressing, and managing your emotions. It's developing and maintaining good social relationships. And it's thinking clearly and solving problems under pressure. And as I alluded to earlier in the talk, I like to think of every human as an iceberg. What you see is my outer behaviors. You see my actions. You see my communications. but you don't see all the things that are impacting those behaviors underneath the surface. My past experiences, my attitudes, my moods, my thoughts, my assumptions, my biases, my intentions, my stressors, all of those things are below the surface. And so my question to you is, are you having what I call in the book inner iceberg conversations with your staff? Are you asking them what keeps you up at night? What motivates you? What are your aspirations? What are you afraid of? What assumptions are you making? Rather than where is the project, where how far along on the project are we tend to have surface level conversations both at home as well as at work. But when you start having those inner iceberg conversations, when you start to understand what's going on internally, both for yourself and for your team, you can make good decisions externally. And that is what emotional intelligence is. It's simply understanding what's going on inside so that you can show up better on the outside. Now, emotional intelligence, in my humble opinion, is simply being intelligent about your emotions. And did you know that a 40-year study of PhDs at the University of California, Berkeley, discovered that emotional intelligence is 4 times more powerful than IQ in predicting who would achieve success in their field? Let's face it, your IQ might have gotten your foot in the door, gotten you the job, but it's your EQ that will get you promoted. Why? Because you're leading people. And whether we like it or not, people are creatures of emotion. So I would like you to I want you to take back the wheel, right? Emotional intelligence is about taking back the wheel. It's about being in the driver's seat of your feelings rather than your feelings driving you. Okay. So I know for me, for many years of my life, I was always an emotional. In fact, my whole life, people told me I was too emotional. Well, guess what? I'm making a friggin' living out of it now. It wasn't that the problem wasn't that I was too emotional. All emotional means is you feel things deeply, but I can feel things deeply and learn how to express them constructively and professionally. And so how a leader manages emotions, both in themselves and others, is what separates good leaders from great leaders. And also, Harvard Business Review mentioned that let's talk about like that's internally how it affects you in the job. But did you know externally that emotionally connected customers are 3 times more valuable in a lifetime? So customers who feel emotionally connected are 306% more valuable over their lifetime than those that are simply satisfied. So let me say that again. They're worth 3 times more. Because emotionally connected customers don't just come back for convenience. They come back because they trust you. They feel seen, heard, and cared for. They tell their friends. They stay loyal, even when the competitors are doing something cheaper, faster. Um, and so that's the ROI of caring. Now, why does this matter? I'd like you to think about, and this is a great question that my one of my clients gave me, which is he puts a sticky note on his door and he says, how am I showing up today? So I love you to think about with whatever's going on in your life outside of work, how might that be, or even inside of work, how is that affecting how you show up, right? Because whether we like it or not, we leave an emotional wake behind. Now, just a quick personal story. Unfortunately, a year and a half ago, I lost my beautiful mother to cancer. We had no idea she had cancer. We thought she broke her foot. We took her to the doctor, and then 13 days later, she was gone. Cancer everywhere. It was fast, it was shocking, and it changed me. And if I'm being honest, I haven't really been showing up as my best self because I've been distracted. I'm full of grief. And here's the interesting thing that I want to share about grief. Even though I consider myself super aware, my fiance said something to me that really rocked me to the core. He said, "I know you're grieving, but it's showing up as anger." So I think a good question for you to ask yourselves is how are you showing up? Are you showing up excited like this lady is, or are you showing up, with your feet dragging? And then all of us, including myself, can't always be with a smile on our face. So my question to you to ask your staff is, how do you feel in my presence? Right? How do you feel in my presence? Yes, you might feel great when I'm happy and excited, but how do you feel in my presence when I'm down? What kind of emotional wake? It's not whether you are leaving a wake, is it's what kind of wake are you leaving behind? And so I always love Maya Angelou's quote that says people may forget what you did, what you said or did, but they will never forget how you feel. And the one thing that I hope I leave you with today is emotionally strong leadership starts with you, but it stays with them. So I'd like to think about what is your EQ, your emotional quotient. Now, I know I'm talking to mostly HR professionals, and this is a topic that you're very familiar with. But just like your IQ, which measures your cognitive intelligence, your ability to think logically, make rational decisions, your EQ measures your emotional intelligence, how well you understand, manage, and use emotions to navigate relationships and challenges. And MHS has a wonderful model called the EQI 2.0 model. And there are lots of models out there, but I like this one. There are many models out there, but only a handful of them are assessed for validity and reliability. I found the emotional quotient inventory version 2, developed by Multi Health System, to be the most useful to helping my clients assess and understand their EQ as it affects their business relationships and leadership skills. Now, here's what the model talks about. That the model is basically saying EI is at the core, but it's made up of 5 key components. The first is self-perception. How do you see yourself? The second is self-expression. How do you express yourself? Now, notice that the arrows are moving to the right. So how you see yourself, it affects how you express yourself. And how you express yourself affects your interpersonal skills, your social skills. And from there, once you're relating and connecting with others, it's going to affect how you make decisions. And this isn't about just making decisions, technical decisions. This is about how well do you make decisions that are when emotions are involved. And then from there, it goes to stress management. How well do you handle stress, change, and the unfamiliar? Now, if you learn nothing from me today, I hope it's this. It's not about just having high EI, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute. There is a dark side to emotional intelligence. You can be overplaying a strength and it becomes a liability. Let's take empathy, a quality that we all know is a good quality to have, to appreciate how someone else's feels. But when you over-index in it, when you are overplaying your empathy, and I'd love to see how many of you are overplaying your empathy. The challenge is when you overplay it, you can have compassion fatigue. You can wear everyone's emotions on your shoulders. You can maybe coddle people. You don't push them to excel. So the key is having a well-balanced wheel. And when you have a well-balanced wheel, you'll have better emotional and social functioning. You'll be a better performer. And overall, you'll have higher emotional well-being, which is ultimately happiness. So the key is to balance your EQ, keeping in mind that all of these things have a dark side. Again, let's take self-regard, which is one of these things. When when you have too much self-regard, you can be a narcissist. You can have an inability to admit mistakes. And so what I'd love to talk about is just what is the business case for EI? Well, I mean, we all know that it helps increase our confidence. It increases our self-awareness when we're more aware of what's going on inside. It improves our communication and trust. It strengthens relationships. You have stronger conflict resolution. You're a better decision maker. You handle stress better. I mean, you deal with change and uncertainty better. And then what does that mean? It leads to employee engagement when people feel seen, heard, and trusted. And it leads to better performance and team alignment. And the one thing I want to share is a study from Talent Smart stated that companies with high EI leadership are 20 times have a 20 times higher performance. And that's just not a soft and fuzzy outcome. That's a measurable business impact. What that shows is that emotional intelligence isn't just a nice to have for leaders, it's a key driver to organizational success. And when leaders are emotionally intelligent, they're better at connecting with their teams, navigating conflict, managing change, and keeping people engaged. So, what I want to do is, I talk about this in the book, but I wanted to give you 5 real case studies. I wanted to put EI into work, put it into practice, and share a little bit. We'll walk into each of these composite scales because there were 5 different composite scales that made up that model. And I want to talk to you about 5 specific leaders. Now, obviously, I've renamed the leader. I've renamed what industry they were in to protect their anonymity. But I'd like to walk you through each of the different composite scales so that you can see not only in yourself, but maybe even your own leaders back in the office, how these might be showing up for good, but also showing up for bad. So let's take self-regard, for instance. Self-regard, which is part of the self-perception composite, means, are you confident and self-assured? The next one is self-actualization. Ask yourself, are you feeling fulfilled in your life? And one thing I want to state is I like to take the EQI assessment every year. I take it around at January because it kind of gives me my resolutions or my themes for the year to work on. And unlike your IQ, which peaks at 18, your EQ rises as you get older. And in fact, one study says it peaks in our 60s. So, as one thing to note is right now, if you're not feeling as fulfilled in your life, maybe ask yourself, why is that? What's causing that? And then the next one is emotional self-awareness. How in tune are you with your emotions and your triggers? So let's talk a little bit about Elnas. Now, let me introduce you to Elnash. She is a brilliant salesperson who was promoted to regional manager at a medical equipment company. Her strengths were clear. She scored high in self-regard and self-actualization. She was confident, competitive, and deeply fulfilled in her success. But she also tipped onto the dark sides in those strengths. With self-regard, her confidence became overconfidence. She believed no one could do the job as well as she could. And so she took over her team's work instead of empowering them. With her self-actualization, her drive to feel fulfilled in her performance made her resistant to shifting the spotlight to others. So she missed the meaning in leading because she was still chasing it as individual wins for herself. As a result, she burnt out and lost the joy that she once had in her work. So I was asked to come in and work with her. And through the EQ assessment and some leadership coaching, she realized these patterns. She learned new skills, like we taught her how to coach others. We taught her how to give feedback and how to lead with empathy. And we reframed what success looked like for her. The result, her team began to thrive. She felt energized again, and so did they. And she didn't have to sacrifice performance to become a more effective, emotionally intelligent leader. So she didn't just go back to being great. She evolved into someone even better. So how I'd like to kind of summarize that is her strengths were her high self-regard and self-actualization. She was confident and competitive and purpose-driven. She was a top performer. But her challenges was she was on the dark side of self-regard and self-actualization. Her overconfidence led to mistrust in her team. She over-identified with individual success, and she struggled with team's emotions. And so what we focused on, and she also struggled with burnout and loss of fulfillment. So the solutions were, we started with an EQ assessment. I always start with an EQI. And then from there, I build a leadership coaching program where we focused on feedback, coaching, and empathy. And we reframed her success through team development. We realized that if her team did well, that was a reflection of her being a great leader. And so the results, it reignited some purpose and confidence in herself. It empowered the team culture, and it sustained team performance with less burnout. So let's talk about the next one. which is, let's talk about self-expression. Self-expression is your communication skills. So, do you express how you are feeling in an appropriate manner, which is emotional expression? Assertiveness, unlike emotional expression, which is expressing your feelings, assertiveness is expressing your thoughts. Do you stand up for yourself? If not, why not? Right? Do you speak up? Do you speak your mind? Right? This is your speaking up with your thoughts and opinions. And independence, which I shared earlier, which is my lowest score, no matter how many years I've been taking this assessment, I still score lowest in independence because I care way too much about what y'all think here. And so I want you to meet Andre. And Andre is probably one of my best success stories. Andre was a very respected VP of finance and administration at a major transportation company. He was under consideration for the CEO role, but one competency held him back, and that was emotional expression, one of his lowest scores in his EQI assessment. Andre showed up as reserved, cautious, and emotionally guarded. And with that demeanor, it served him well in a numbers driven role. It created, but however, it created real challenges when it came to his leadership presence. So, although in his finance role, being guarded and emotionally cautious was great, but it doesn't serve to be very inspiring if you don't share how you're feeling. On the low end of emotional expression, he struggled to articulate how he felt. And on the dark side, his quiet nature was misinterpreted as withholding and disingenuous. The board didn't trust what they couldn't read. And his lack of emotional visibility made people feel disconnected and uncertain about his potential to lead. Here's what I love about this story. Andre didn't stay stuck. Over the course of a year, we worked on his emotional expression skills, learning to speak more about his feelings, show transparency in decision making, tell them why he was doing what he was doing, and matched his nonverbal cues to he was saying. He practiced adjusting his tone, smiling more, showing he was more engaged, especially in high stake conversations. He began to feel more confident, being seen and emotionally available. The result? Not only did he earn the CEO role, but under his leadership, the company didn't just survive, it thrived. This is why I say this is one of my biggest success story. His company has now won multiple industry awards. And what's even better, he was just awarded one of the top most influential men in the province of British Columbia. So this is proof emotional intelligence isn't about changing who you are. It's about growing into the leader your role demands. And so again, if I were to summarize this, his strengths were he was analytical, he was steady, he was a high performer. Again, trusted in finance in his ops role. He was purpose driven and values based. The challenge was he had low emotional expression, so he appeared stoic, stiff, and guarded. He struggled to inspire trust and connection. And the solutions were, again, I always start with an EQI assessment. And in this case, we focused on his self expression. We practiced emotional tone. I would teach him to say, hey, at every beginning of a sentence, tell people how you feel. I feel proud, I'm frustrated, whatever it is, practice emotional tone, body language, and transparency. And this improved his communication and leadership presence. And as I shared his results, not only was he promoted as CEO, he built trust with the board and the team. His company was awarded multiple awards for excellence. And just this last year, he was awarded as one of the most influential people in the province. Let's move into interpersonal. Ask yourself, how well do you have a difficult time making connections? This is interpersonal relationships. Empathy. Are you able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes? And social responsibility. Do you like to give back or be helpful to the greater good? I'd like to introduce you to Wolfgang. Now, Wolfgang is a senior partner at a prestigious law firm. He was smart. He was detail focused. He was deeply committed to his clients. But when it came to emotional intelligence, he had a clear blind spot, the interpersonal composite of the EQI. Wolfgang scored low in interpersonal relationships, social responsibility, and empathy. Those are three critical skills for leadership. He had high standards. He definitely had high standards and expected others to operate just like him. If they didn't, he dismissed them. His relationships with his colleagues were purely functional. If you didn't serve a purpose, he didn't make space for you. Now, here's the challenge. With his low empathy and limited social responsibility, that created friction. His colleagues saw him as self-serving, detached, even unapproachable. He didn't ask others how they felt. He didn't see their perspectives, and it was hurting the culture. Now, through coaching, we tackled each of those interpersonal skills head on. We worked on helping him to listen, to understand, not just to be understood. We focused on him listening, not just to reply. He began checking in with colleagues, acknowledging their contributions, and recognizing that good leadership is built on trust, not just intellect, right? How many of us know a really highly intelligent person, someone who has got high IQ, but has very limited EQ? Sure, there were setbacks for sure. He was he did this didn't come to him easily. There were days that he did really well connecting with others, and then there were days that it was awkward and he didn't know what to say. But and sometimes he slipped into old patterns. But here's the wonderful thing about EQ. It can be enhanced. It can be developed. It just takes time. But over time, he began to value his peers, not just tolerate them. He started offering help, engaging in real conversations, and building meaningful relationships. And the impact? His team became more cohesive. The firm's engagement improved, and his ability to lead people, lead through people, not just around them, set the foundation for a long-term cultural change. Wolfgang proved that even the most analytical minds can lead with heart once they learn how to connect. And so again, if I were to summarize this, his strengths were he was definitely analytical, detailed, and principled. He had a strong client. He advocated for his clients. He had high personal standards, all really great things. But his challenges were he was low not only in empathy and social responsibility, but also in interpersonal relationships. And by the way, you don't have to be low in all three skills. You can be low, like in my case, in the self expression realm. My two highest scores are emotional expression and assertiveness, but my lowest score is independence. And so again, it's about determining what's your weakest link, because you are only as strong as your weakest link. And so not only did he struggle with trust and connecting with peers, he was independent to a fault. He viewed team support as optional. He viewed relationships as transactional, not collaborative. And so, again, we started with the EQI. It's always where I start from a coaching perspective. We target his coaching on teaching him how to lead with empathy, how to have a team mindset, and how to have emotional awareness, self-awareness. And we practiced active listening. We actually did role playing. We taught him to do regular check-ins with his team, and he learned to value others' input and not just his own, others' perspective and not just his own. The results, as I said, stronger team cohesion and definitely improved peer relationships and engagement. And most importantly, he had a collaborative culture with greater trust and support. Okay, let's do the next one. Decision making. Decision making is really about problem solving. It has under decision making, there are three competencies. One is problem solving. Are you even aware of your emotional state when making decisions? Reality testing, which is, do you let your emotions cloud your judgment? And impulse control, are you able to control your impulses during those times? So I'd like you to meet Kelly. Now, Kelly was a mid manager in a warehousing company who had trouble taking the wheel. Um, who had no trouble. Who had no trouble taking the wheel. She loved to be in charge, but often drove over. But often drove right over everyone who didn't see it her way. It was her way or the highway. She was smart, opinionated, and genuinely wanted the best from her team. But she had a blind spot, and that was in the decision-making realm, particularly in reality testing. She believed her perspective was the truth, not a truth, but the truth. Her reality was the reality. And that rigidity led to friction with her peers. Her emotions, especially frustration, clouded her objectivity. And how many of you, by a show of hands, have allowed your emotions about someone in the workplace to cloud your objectivity of them, right? We all have some biases. So, but instead of naming and processing those feelings, she stuffed them down. What came out was righteousness, control, conviction that she was right and others were wrong. I'll never forget telling her, "You are not the standard to which everything is judged." And that moment cracked the door open. Through coaching, Kelly began to slow down. She started to check her assumptions. She started asking others what their input was. And most importantly, realizing that her emotions weren't obstacles, they were information. Asking others for their input. And most importantly, realizing that emotions were not the enemy. She realized that she could use them as data, as intel, as messengers, signaling her to use them to make better decisions. And when she leaned into vulnerability, instead of just telling, she didn't lose respect, she gained their trust. The result? A more collaborative, connected leadership style, better decisions, and the team felt seen, heard, and valued. And Kelly's story reminds us that leadership isn't about always being right. It's about being open. And that's what emotionally intelligent decision making is all about. And so, again, in summary, when we think of her strengths, she was confident, she was passionate, she was driven. She had strong ideas and clear convictions, and she was committed to improving this team. Her challenges were she had low reality testing. She allowed her emotions to cloud her objectivity, which then assumed her perspective was the only valid one. She didn't think that anyone else had anything valid to say, and she dismissed other people's input, which caused conflict. Solutions, again, as always, in all my coaching, we start with an EQI. And in coaching, we talked about emotional insight and decision making. We slowed down. I tried to get her to slow down and check her assumptions, which meant that she needed to practice vulnerability and open dialogue, which was really hard for Kelly. But again, her results, she became more collaborative and inclusive leader. It strengthened her peer relationships, and she actually found power in vulnerability and shared decision making. And she no longer seen vulnerability as a weakness. And isn't it interesting when you think of vulnerability, right? Brene Brown says it best. Vulnerability, why is it that it's strength in everyone else, but we always think it's weakness in us? Vulnerability is absolutely strength. Okay, so let's do the last one, which is stress management. Now, stress management has three areas that contribute to EI, and it's really about flexibility. So, how well do you adapt to change and uncertainty? It's stress tolerance. How well do you cope with stress, and are you resilient in trying times? And it's about optimism. Are you able to remain hopeful about the future? So I'd like to share one last example or case study, and this is literally about Sophia. Now, Sophia was a talented, high-performing event manager who was running at full speed, straight to burnout. She arrived early, stayed late, skipped breaks, checked in with her team after hours. She never paused to breathe. Why? Because she felt guilty asking for help, even when she was drowning. How many of you can relate to that? That actually, my friends, is the dark side of independence. So, unlike me, who needs people too much, the dark side of independence is when you never ask for help. You can lead to burnout, right? You can make people feel not needed, wanted, or trusted. Going back to Sophia, she struggled with the stress management composite, especially stress tolerance and flexibility. She didn't adapt to her stress, she absorbed it. And over time, it started to show up as irritability, disconnection, and emotional exhaustion. Now, in coaching, we worked on reframing help as a strength, not a weakness. We helped her recognize that delegation is a leadership skill, not a personal failure. She started setting clearer boundaries with her team and more importantly, with herself. And she began to express how she was feeling, especially when she was overwhelmed. So her team could step in and support her. And then they were happy to do it. She didn't lose respect, she earned more of it. And the result? Sophia became a more resilient leader. Her work-life balance improved. She felt more positive, more present, and more connected, not just for her team, but for herself. Sophia's story is a reminder that stress management isn't a luxury, it's a leadership necessity. And when we make space for emotional well-being, as I said, remember the outline in that model, the thing on the outside, your emotional well-being. Ultimately, when we focus on that, your performance improves, your happiness improves, and that's what happened to Sophia. So, in closing, her strengths were, we said she was a high achiever, she was deeply committed, she had a strong work ethic, and she was loyal to her team, and she was reliable and driven to deliver. Her challenges were, though, she was low in stress tolerance and flexibility. She took too much on without asking for help, which is the dark side of stress tolerance. And she was too rigid in her ways of doing things. It was her way or the highway. And so she had guilt around delegation and boundary setting, and which led to emotional exhaustion and irritability. So solutions, again, I started with an EQI assessment. We coached her to delegate, to set boundaries, to practice self-care. Self-care, as I shared with her, isn't selfish. And we built routines to recharge and regulate emotions. So we practiced emotional expression to invite support. So I taught her how to say, hey, I'm overwhelmed. I need support. And the results, it improved her work-life balance and her well-being. It had her team felt more with her because they felt that they could help her rather than they felt like she didn't trust them anymore, like she used to when she was leading, doing everything herself. And it led to greater emotional resilience and leadership presence. So I know we've only got about 15 minutes left, but I thought I'd be remiss not to give you your own practical tools for emotionally intelligent leadership. And I know you're all super busy. I got to see, I get to, in the last 6 years alone, I've trained 60,000 leaders. I have surveyed using the EQI assessment. 60,000 leaders. And I can tell you that a lot of us have less time than we've ever had before. So the tools I want to give you today are only going to take you a few minutes. And the first tool that I highly encourage you to consider taking, if you haven't already, is the EQ assessment by Multi Health Systems. It literally 20 years ago changed my life. I have never been happier. And now, as you know, I just lost my best friend, my mother. But it's not that bad things don't happen to me, but I am content. I'm satisfied with my life. And that's sort of the byproduct of emotional intelligence. So I want you to think, and I'd love you to write in the chat, of all the things you've learned about emotional intelligence over the years, and maybe even just what you learned in this class about those 15 different skills, what's one area you think you're strong in? If everyone could just jot down um, what they think they're strong in. Self-regulation, self-control, reality testing. Great, Michelle. Self-control, social responsibility. Wonderful. Empathy, self-expression. Okay, emotional self-awareness. Wonderful. Okay, I'm now going to ask you to pause, and this is a harder question. What's one area you'd like to improve in? For me, it's my independence and my dark side of flexibility. What is it for you? Okay, assertiveness, empathy, impulse control, independence and stress management. Yeah, Leda, I feel you. Energizing my own self. Yeah, for sure. Assertiveness. So, a couple of things for you to think about is if you were to kind of figure out, if you were to even just guess where you are on those 15 competencies, where do you fall? And how does that affect the way you lead yourself or others? And like I said, as soon as I realized how my emotional makeup was helping, but also hurting me, changed everything. So I encourage you to do what I do. Take this EQ assessment each and every year. Use that as, instead of your New Year's resolutions, use that as your theme for the year. So this year I'm working on stress tolerance, on impulse control, and my darn independence. But last year it was independence, social responsibility, and self-regard. So each year it's different. So I encourage you to think about all of those skills. How do they help? But then also, how do they hurt? Now, the next tool that I wanted to give you is only going to take you 5 minutes. And I call this a 5-minute stress check. And the first question I'd like you to ask yourself is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how stressed are you? And I always like to kind of give myself a scale. 1 is calm and collected. 2 is mildly stressed. 3 is moderately stressed. 4 is highly stressed, and 5 is maxed out. And then once I figure out, how stressed I am, I then ask the question, why am I stressed? What caused that stress? And then my favorite thing to do after I figure out the what and the why is, what's one thing I can let go of today? Maybe it's, I'm going to let go of perfection. Maybe it's going to be, I'm going to say no without guilt. Or maybe I'm going to release what's out of my control, and stay in my lane. We all have to-do lists, but what about creating to-do not lists? Stop carrying problems that aren't yours, right? Stop calling constant stress normal. Stop bending until you lose yourself, right? These are things that you should not do. Not just a to-do list, but the things that you need to stop doing. And then once you think of one thing that you can let go of, what's one thing you can add to your day? Throughout the day, sometimes I put myself in my own corner and take a moment of self-care, to step outside, to breathe, just to take a moment. Maybe for some of you, it's a gratitude practice. Before you go to bed, write down 3 things that went well today. Maybe it's reframing a tough conversation. Maybe not thinking it's personal. Maybe it's thinking about it as an opportunity to solve a problem. Maybe, remember on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, we were allowed to call a friend. Maybe it's reaching out to a colleague or a mentor for a quick check-in. Or simply, maybe it's taking a short walk, right? Walking in nature calms our parasympathetic nervous system. The third tool I want to give you, so other than the EQ self-assessment, the EQI 2.0 assessment, I also, with the 5 minute check in, I also wanted to give you one last one. Again, it's only going to take you 5 minutes. And if you don't have 5 minutes, you got bigger problems. And the first one is a 5 minute, or the second one is a 5 minute care check in. And that's not only to care about yourself, but to check in with your staff. So, three questions that I talk about in my book, which is what are you feeling? And in my book, I have an emotions poster. I encourage you to go onto my website at eiexperience.com or carolynstern.com and go into resources. You can download this poster right now and have it above your desk like I do. It reminds me before I go into my next Zoom meeting or before I have that difficult conversation with an employee, what am I feeling and how are my emotions leaking into the conversation? And then the second question is not only what are you feeling, well, what is that feeling telling you about yourself, others, and the situation? And then the last question I always ask is how can I support you? Now, that could be how can you support yourself or how can you support your team? Now, here's the thing. You don't have to be anyone's emotional therapist. Quite frankly, most of you are not qualified. But it is your job not to be afraid to talk to about emotions, yours or others, and ask those three simple questions. What are you feeling? What is that feeling telling you about yourself, others, and the situation? And how can you support yourself? And so I'd like you to think about how you can do this. You can certainly speak to an associate about and having a one-on-one about how they're feeling and do your care check-in there, but also doing your care check-in with yourself. So the last thing that I want to share before I let you go is I want to give you some implementation tips on how to create a culture of EI. Now, the first thing that I would do is hire for EQ, not just IQ. So this is where we integrate EQ assessments into your employee selection process. And if any of you are interested, I am a certified training partner of MHS. So if you would like to get certified to administer your own assessments inside your company, at the end, you can feel free to reach out to me. But I would start integrating EQ assessments, whether it's having me do it for you or another external partner, or you doing it yourself. The second is build it into your leadership development. So that means embed frameworks like the EQI into your training programs. I would give them pre and post assessments. How would they assess themselves prior to the class and how would they assess themselves after the class? And this can be group-based EI skills. And I saw that one person had a question about group debriefs, and I can talk about that at the end. The third is I would include a scenario-based learning and role plays. The only way to really learn something is to learn to apply it. So giving them case studies and role plays to practice. And then I would offer coaching, both private and group. So use one-on-one coaching for personalized growth. Make sure you make EI a daily practice. Normalize your emotional check-ins in meetings and measure and reinforcement, right? What gets measured gets managed. So use pulse surveys, engagement scores, and I always like to start with an EQI assessment, but I always end, maybe in a year or 6 months, I always get the leaders to redo it again, this time doing a 360 so that they can see how others see them. Now, I believe emotional intelligence is so important for hiring that I created a toolkit. If you're interested, you can download it by scanning the QR code. It's a 9-page hiring toolkit that gives you excellent EI interview questions, role play scenarios. It even gives you questions, emotional intelligence reference check questions, and other hiring guidelines available for you to download so that you'll start to hire with EI at the forefront. So you can take a picture of this QR code now and sign up and get the resource. All right, I've only got 1 minute left, and I'd love to end with emotionally strong leadership is ultimately having a strong mind and a kind heart. And as I said earlier, it starts with you, but it stays with them. You leave an emotional wake behind. So I would love it if you could think about on your own, what are you going to stop doing? Now that you think about all your own emotional intelligence, what are you going to start doing? And what are you going to continue doing to enhance your emotional intelligence. Now, if anything that I said kind of has interested you or kind of sparked something inside of you, if you're interested in my book, here's a copy of how you can get a signed copy, or you can purchase it at Amazon. But if you'd like a signed copy, that comes with a bunch of goodies, including the emotions poster and some magnets and some pins and things like that, feel free to scan the QR code now. Um, I would love to end the way that I always love to end every session, and I encourage you to do this in your own classes, in your own departments or meetings. And that would be to end with a one word feeling check in. So I always like to start a meeting with a one word feeling and end a meeting. Remember, emotional intelligence is a work of heart. You're building these muscles. Some of them are overutilized, some of them are underutilized, and some of them are just right. You've got to figure out which ones you need to work on. So, some reflection questions to think about is, what are you feeling? What is that golden nugget? What did you take out of today's session? What was your big takeaway? And then ultimately, how are you going to integrate EI into your organization? Now, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions, but I would like to offer all of you on this call today, and I know there's 87 of you right now on the call, but I'd love to offer you a 30-minute call. That if you want to talk, just scan the QR code. You can book a 30-minute session with me. And we can talk about not only your team's needs, but perhaps your needs. I just want to say a big, big thank you for hosting me today, and MHS for sponsoring me to be here. And thank you, HR.com, for having me. I just, again, if anyone's interested, there's a link to my newsletter, a link to my LinkedIn site, and a link to my website. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today.
Carolyn,
and I'll answer any questions if people want to stay behind.
Carolyn, there's a few people that have asked for I think it was the first QR code you had before your
Sure.
book one.
Yep.
If you could put it back on that
I can
slide.
put that back up. Yep. Here you go.
And unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A. We're
Oh,
past our time now. Sorry.
all right. Well,
So,
if you are interested in asking me any questions specifically, feel free to reach out to me either on LinkedIn or my email. I'll put it in the chat so that everyone can see it. But it's Carolyn at eiexperience.com. And feel free to reach out to me. I'm sorry I had so much to share. We didn't have a lot of time for questions, but I will take a scan of your questions. And if you want, you can reach out to me to get them answered. So thank you so much, everyone.
I'd like to thank Carolyn as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording will be available on the HR.com website within 24 hours. The webcast credit will show in your HR.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.